We're all familiar with the fast pace of the translation industry. It leads to fierce competition and demanding deadlines. In such tough environments, only the adaptive survive. Since we don't have time to let evolution give us a few extra fingers, like our ancestors, we had to start using our monkey brains and make ourselves some tools. This was the motivation behind the Jaeger program. But you need the right tools for the right situations. And if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Sounds intuitive enough, right? But in practice, it can often be overlooked. So, at Linguimundi, to make sure we don't miss out on useful insight, we follow the Pdca method. We first identify a problem, condense it to a attackable dimension, and clearly identify and describe its aspects. Then present and test possible solutions and analyze the results for anything of value. Finally, we either adapt or implement these changes on larger scales, always going back and repeating the PDCA cycle.
In this case, we found ourselves limited in our output, having to compromise quality for word count increases, while trying to keep up with increasingly shorter deadlines. Burdening linguists with heavy workloads led to negative impacts on their health and long-term productivity. So that clearly wasn't the answer. So how could we solve this problem?
We started with meetings and open discussions on potential solutions. What if we split the workload of a translator equally between translating and revising to avoid burnout and lapse of quality? What if we use color coding for easier communication between translators and revisers on terms? And what about using a speech-to-text program?
Now, usually the first attempt at solving a problem won't produce the perfect answer, as we soon learned. For English, we found Dragon, a speech recognition software which works very well for our needs, and it's also available in Spanish, French, Italian, German, and Japanese.
For Portuguese, we tried different options, such as Hey Memo Queue, but they weren't quite what we were looking for, so we had to be persistent. It was only when we stumbled upon Braina that we knew we'd found a solution. Virtual assistant software that makes use of the speech recognition technology of Google, which means it has a wide array of languages available, as well as different variants on those languages, such as Serbian, Lithuanian, Swedish. Though not as sophisticated as Dragon, it still proved itself a very useful software for our purposes.
Then, all we had to do was test it and hopefully come up with a new adequate workflow for this way of translating. To our stakeholders. Scratch that. Dear stakeholders, comma. In compliance with the legal obligations and specifically the provisions of articles and of the comma, we present for your approval the Consolidated Directors' Report, the balance sheet, comma, income statement by nature, and cash flow statement, comma, and the notes for the 2020 financial year. Full stop. Macroeconomic framework. Select framework. Delete. XY. This year has been extraordinary in many ways. The effects of select COVID-19. Add that to the vocabulary. COVID-19. COVID-19.
Braina, start listening. Dados sociais. Maria Santos explica que a XYX ocorre normalmente em meados de junho. Vírgula, altura em que apresenta os dados sociais do ano anterior. Ponto. Dado que a XYX de meados do ano foi adiada para o mês de novembro, vírgula, foram então enviados aos membros do CEE os dados sociais relativos ao primeiro semestre de 2020. Vírgula, além dos dados sociais de 2019. Ponto. Esta propõe começar pelos acidentes mortais no ano de 2019 e 2020, vírgula, para, vírgula, em seguida, vírgula, once we have the data, we go back to the problem, see if it's worth implementing on a larger scale or suggest different approaches, and of course come up with more improvement ideas for the process. This is how we came up with this workflow for speech-to-text.
First, just open MemoQ and turn the software on. Start dictating, clearly and in your natural speaking voice. To avoid flow in the dictation, simply go through the segments without confirming them, maybe with the down key. This avoids getting stuck in trying to correct these small mistakes that Dragon may cause. We decided upon this workflow after trying several different ones for dictation, like focusing on confirming segments one by one, or even trying to dictate in work and then importing it back into MemoQ, which were never as effective as this continuous flow method.
We also had to consider how to approach term research so as not to break this flow. We came up with two different methods for this. Research terms before starting the translation, using, for example, MemoQ's function of term extraction, which is exceedingly helpful, or use placeholders, such as XYX, where a translated term should be, then research them at the end of the translation and insert them in place. Once you're done with the text, go back to the start and revise and confirm each segment. Because you've been dictating until now and weren't too stuck on the text itself, this gives some distance to your own translation and allows for a better revision.
There are also some Dragon-specific voice commands, such as scratch that to delete the last thing you said, select desired word to bring up more options to maybe change the word or capitalize it, and you can press any keyboard shortcut with your voice by saying press and then that keyboard shortcut. Now, once we had our hypothesis, we implemented it on a smaller scale, assigning the task of collecting and analyzing the data to two linguists in our company. This was an easy task in this case, since all we had to do was compare our output numbers, something we already recorded daily before this. Though this is a very small sample size from only one person, we can already see an increase of around 40% purely in word count output. Yet this was not the only aspect we found marked improvements on. We also found there are improvements in the quality of the translation, as speaking sentences aloud often makes them more fluent and clearer. The higher output also gets closer to that of revision, allowing for simultaneous translation and revision, cutting time gaps that force the reviser to wait for the translator to produce enough for revision. It also allows linguists to handle the increasingly heavy workloads of the industry without negatively affecting their mental or physical health. This avoids burnout and allows for a more balanced, happy team in the long term. And of course, there are always, as with everything, some drawbacks to this technology. Although particularly good at text such as minutes, reports, or even literary texts, speech-to-text does not lend itself as well to highly specialized texts with lots of technical terms, such as advanced technical manuals, glossaries, or dictionaries, for example.
This can, of course, depend on the linguist and whether they are entirely at ease translating in a highly specialized area. Still, both programs also make easy common mistakes, mostly in punctuation, accents, and very similar words, which can be easy to miss even in revision. So there must be some special attention paid to these details. Specifically for Braina, there is also not as much customization for commands as Dragon has. You have to always use the keyboard and the mouse as backup.
Now that we've got this edge on the competition, we are willing to trade knowledge with you.